Okay, that leads us to the covenant that God made with David. Some background information. All of the previous covenants set the stage for a kingdom in Israel. So the covenant with Noah, with Abraham, with Moses, all of them set the stage. It says, because God was faithful to his covenant with Noah, sinners continued to live and increase on the earth. Because God was faithful to his covenant with Abraham, his descendants became a nation. And because God was faithful to his covenant with Moses, the nations settled in their promised land, which set the stage of history for the establishing of a kingship to rule over the kingdom of Israel. And so once again, God initiated the covenant, in this case, by choosing David as a young boy. And you probably know the story. Now, once again, if you know the story, God's chosen instrument blew it. After David eventually, he slew Goliath and he eventually became king. And then he has a kingdom and all the promises that God had given to him under the covenant. But eventually, David blew it. And if you don't know that story, go back and read it for yourself. But David blew it. And so nevertheless, the Old Testament records a sad end for the house of David. The sin of David's sons caused God to remove the throne from Jerusalem, and the nation and its king went into exile in Babylon. And so the prophets foretold that a descendant of David would restore the kingdom someday, which of course we know Jesus is that descendant of David, and it's a different type of kingdom. So remember, the covenant, we notice, depends on God, not on man. So even though David blew it, God was still going to be faithful to his covenant because God pursues people. So covenant details. The internal sign of the covenant to David was once again faith. He had to trust God against odds that God was telling the truth and was going to be true to his promise. And the external sign of David's covenant was a throne, because that, of course, was the promises that he would have a throne. So the external sign was obviously that there was a throne to sit on. And so the promise was a king and a kingdom, and that was the promise to David and his line. And of course, Jesus is the ultimate fulfillment of that. Christ fulfills all the hopes of the Davidic covenant. He brings the blessings of God's kingdom to all who serve him faithfully. And so that's why it's important that we see that Jesus is in the lineage of David, because it's an extension of this covenant. So hit pause, talk this through, and then we'll get to the final covenant, the covenant that Jesus ushers in, the new covenant.